Good. So this is Service Design Drinks. My name's Adam. I have Dee over there. I have Mati, who's also part of the team. And then we also have Ted, who's our guest speaker, all the way from Norway, which I introduced before. So let's get started. So the first question is, does everyone have a drink? We don't, we're not prejudiced or drinkist, as I would say. You can have wine, milk, or tea, or coffee. Maybe if you're coming from, Scotland, or you're drinking tea, or from India, maybe the time is a bit different there, I would assume. If Australia, it's probably coffee, I would say. Nice flat white. All right. So, oh, look, there's a poll. Yeah, like I said just before, there's a poll. If you would like to give us your thoughts and feelings, you can definitely fill those out. We're going to publish those later, maybe on Instagram to share. Or within our Slack community if you want to do that. So that's just on the right tab. You should be able to see that, and you should be able to see the people tab too. So welcome. It's so good that so many of you joined. I would like to first just tell us a little bit about what we do at Service Design Drinks. So like many of the other communities that do service design, we're all about getting people to meet, including everybody, designers and non-designers alike, about leveling up or skilling up, sharing and learning different tools, practicing speaking and coaching. This is one of my first time speaking, so I'm really excited to be able to take up this beginner slot that we have, and also having drinks with each other. Of course, we would prefer to be doing it face-to-face, but now we have such an international crowd, so it's fantastic. Feel free to say hi in the chat as well. So, who is behind SDD? We have Marty, who is coming from Fjord. We have Mella, who's coming from BCGDV. Gabor, who's working with Helios, which is a hospital organization, a health organization. Me, I'm a service designer from Zalando. My name's Adam. And then we have Dee Scarano, who is freelancing at the moment, but a whiz with the design sprints as well. So we've been running the service design jams in Berlin for the last four to 5 years. I don't know. It's quite so many jams. And we handed that over to a brand new team, and they're all really excited. Make sure that you keep in contact with that. And from Oslo, awesome. And we have, and now we're running the service design drinks in Berlin. If you have topics or things that you want us to talk about, reach out to us, connect with us. We would love to hear your thoughts on how we can better build this community and be a service to everyone. So things to mention. Here's my list of important things that I cannot forget to say. So we would love to build a respectful community. Of course, you can chat with other people in the sessions and in the network, but please respect each other. Be nice, be polite. If anyone's breaking those rules, please let us know, and we can kick them from whatever sessions they're disrupting or causing a challenge with. We are masters at being politely polite. Yes, so there's two more things which is important, which is new to this hop-in software, which is the speed networking. You can probably see that on your left or right tab. The sessions and the networking. There are two fun things that we're going to look forward to at the end of the event, where you can meet and greet and chat and talk and do a bit of speed networking at the end of the event. It's really fun, trust me. Sounds boring, but it's great. Just for those that might need to drop off or do something, or maybe you want to share this with your friends, this will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So if you're looking for that as well, then hello, YouTube, for all those people watching later. Say hello, introduce yourself. We would love to hear where you're from, where you're joining us, what you do, etc., etc., etc. This is we try to make it as interactive as possible, even if it's online. And finally, there'll be a Q&A at the end. So please save your questions till the end, write them down, and we'll have a special session for that as well with the speakers. Cool. So one last thing as well. If you go to sddberlin.com, I'm just going to write that in the chat for you. You can join our Slack group or our Slack community, Service Design Berlin. And there you can ask any questions or any advice that you might be seeking, or jobs you might be seeking, or jobs you might want to offer, anything that you want to connect with the community in Berlin. Then you can please feel free to join our Slack. We often have great questions and great advice coming from there. Cool. Let's go to the next thing. Oh, look, there's another poll. Haha. Yeah, feel free to answer the next questions. So what's on the agenda today? So we have the first talk by this amazing guy called Adam. He's crazy attractive and, you know, super funny. And then we have a second talk who is much more experienced on the topic and much more wise on the topic, called Ted Matthews. He's a fantastic speaker, and I really, really look forward to having him talk and share his thoughts. And lastly, we'll have discussion and open questions, and then we'll have some time for networking. It's pretty straightforward. Might take about 1 to 1.5 hours. I mean, it depends how long you want to network for and connect with people for. You might get a little bit addicted. Let's just say that. Okay, so like I said, these talks tonight are about ritual design. What is ritual design? How ritual design works. Has nothing to do with foresight analysis. I'm so sorry about that, Ted. But all about ritual design and how ritual design can empower and make service design way cooler, way better, and way more human. All right, so first up is me. First, I just want to get a little bit of a feedback. When you hear this, can you just do a bit of hand clapping, say hello, give me a compliment in the chat? That'd be super, super reassuring for me. You can just do that whenever as well. I mean, add it to my LinkedIn, my Instagram is also there. You know, feel free to share compliments with me. Thanks, Igor. All right, so now I'm gonna leave and come back. So yes, like I said, I'm the first talk for today. And ritual design is, hey, Catalina. Thank you, Alexandra. Perfect, loving the feedback. So like I said, this topic is about ritual design, and ritual design is something that I kind of fell into from the way that I grew up, but it's a super interesting topic which I've been diving into really, really quite hardcore and talking a lot. I think my friends are super sick of hearing me, but it's a really, really interesting topic. Before I get into that, I'm a service designer and I now work at Zalando. Before that, I was at a design agency at IXDS, so I have a bit of product agency experience. And I think what's really, really interesting about this topic for me is its ability to make people connect, join through community, and it really draws on the human side of life, which is really, really fantastic. Just as a definition, I think ritual design, when we talk ritual design, what we mean is like it's routine. It may be something like a stand-up, which is a routine or a process, but it's more than that as well. It's this routine with meaning, with values embedded. So it's those two things coming together, and I think that's what I mean when I say ritual design. All right. So now we get into it. So me as a service designer, what I love about ritual design and where I can see its value is, you know, as a service designer, you're always saying it's not just the customer, it's a user. And I think with ritual design, and I think with service design, it's also about making people into humans again. And I think that's always the fight. Oh, loving the compliments, guys. Keep them coming. So it's also about turning users into humans. So we normally have the hopes, fears, needs, but I think ritual design also touches onto these far deeper needs, which is belonging and living up to values and these kind of things. So I think that's really, really powerful here. And I think that's something that I love about ritual design, and I want to create more in my services, in the ambition of a greater world where services and your work actually lives these values that you might have. And I think that's really important. That's where I want to go. But on the other side, as a service designer or as a product designer at Zalando, I often feel that I'm running through checklists all the time or creating processes all the time, which is, okay, this person has to now agree to the GDPR, which is of course great, but what about this backend rollout phase test and this legal requirements here and these 5 different processes and touch points that we have to get through? Oh, and they're not following the user journey like we wanted them to. And I think that's always the pain as a service designer, right? Where you have this fight between building something that's memorable and loving and loyalty building and amazing, but then you get stuck on these, 3 million different touch points that you have to orchestrate. So I guess I get sometimes a little bit lost with being a service designer. And I remember a time in my life, so for anyone that doesn't know, this is a little bit of a personal story, but I grew up as a Pentecostal born-again Christian, which means that I was part of one of those churches that has a a band up the front and sings and claps. Maybe you've seen them in some movies, or if you've heard of places like Hillsong, then you possibly know what I'm talking about. And maybe there are some people that go to church. I had a great time growing up in church, I have to say, and I really, really enjoyed it. I definitely think it's an amazing organization and a community to be a part of. And I was also a youth leader there. This is an actual sketch from one of the photos that I took. It was on a beach, and we did an amazing week with the youth there. So I felt very connected, really welcomed, loved. I had lots of growth and lots of potential to be around people that I really trusted and cared for every day of my life. It was fantastic. So, and I think what I realized when I reflect upon that time of my life is that what made it really effective at the core of it was its ability to break down processes in a very, very human way. So when you walked into the church, there were greeters. When you were there and once the service was over, you would have coffee and tea afterwards, and you would connect with people and people that you'd seen a week before, and you would catch up. You had mentors. Every Wednesday or every second Wednesday, we had a Bible study where we'd get together with a very close community. And like I said, my passion was working with youth and kids, so I did a lot of youth work as well. So I also had my passions there. And all of these were broken down into really structured or quite well organized rituals that were very obvious and very repeatable and very easy to understand. And I think that's what I observed. I observed these rituals and thought, hey, this is really fantastic. And now where I'm at, oh, look, there's a poll. Look, there's a poll. You should answer the poll. Now, if I reflect upon my professional career, and when I'm in the organizations that I've been through as at IXDS and an agency and at Zalando and Service Design Berlin, for example, I think it's so amazing that we don't quite get it yet. And there are so many opportunities where we could really implement ritual design, or what I've learned from my religious days and embedding meaning into things into what we currently do today. Or how I work today and the communities that we work in today. So, sorry, I've got to look at my notes. So I can see these parallels, and I thought, like, okay, looking at stand-ups, which is meant to be this thing where you really embed, like, you just meant to say what you're doing as quickly as possible. You know, sometimes you can do the plain cups and different things, but I also thought, what about doing simple things like being thankful, or just saying what you're thankful for to drive home that value of being thankful? Or when you're doing workshops, which I do a lot of, and I just wrote an article about remote design sprints, what about doing certain icebreakers and rituals to start off the day or to end the day? And you might have found your own rituals now that you're working online and remotely, but I think that's where the application can really build in the values of the organization or the company that you work for. So I'm going to give you two examples really, really quickly because I'm running out of time. But what I wanted to say is there's this really great ritual that I found at IXDS. Kudos to those people that set this up. But there's this very simple ritual to do with birthdays. Now, I'm one of those people that kind of cringes when I get asked for money, or that's not because I'm Jewish either. No, but when there's no organization, I find it very unfair. And I think that should be something that's organized that everyone can stick to, that's very clear. So what IXDS did is that when it was your birthday, a month before, you would get asked what book you would like. That was done by the office manager or whoever was organizing that. You would pick a book, and the idea is that you would pick a book, and that same book would be purchased for the IXDS library. Now, the idea was that the value that they wanted to show through this is that we value you as an employee and as a person that works in this team. So we want to thank you on your birthday. It's a special day. And we also want to update the knowledge that we have within this company, and we want to do it with relevant information, and we want to appreciate your input and what your thought is for this company and what people should read. So part of that ritual also, once you got the book on your birthday, you would say, hey, this is really amazing. Thank you for my present. And here's why it's important that you should also read this book. So I think I got, this is service design thinking or something for the library, but I was able to share my passion and this new knowledge. So that embedded the value into this simple ritual, which takes a lot of confusion out of what can normally be awkward. Okay, there's birthday cake. How long do I have to eat the birthday cake? Or how much small talk do I have to make so I can get my coffee and go back to my desk? And this is a really nice ritual that kind of organizes that. So a second one really quickly, just to explain that also it can go into the work life and service life. So when I was working at Factory Berlin, which is a startup community for entrepreneurs here, also a co-working space in Berlin. We were tasked with building up and onboarding a lot of people. But of course, it was a small community, a fragile community, and we wanted like-minded people in. So if you've ever been to a nightclub in Berlin, maybe you've had this heute nicht, which is today, no, sorry. Well, without the sorry part, they're not so nice. So yeah, we had to like put this ritual in that if you were accepted into the place, that your onboarding experience would also allow you to introduce yourself. We had processes which would allow you to connect. And as the community grew, we actually took this Bible study kind of and passion kind of based from churches, and we started to create circles. So we had the designer circle, we had the freelance circle, we had the legal design circle or legal entrepreneur circle. I think we had writers and copywriters circle. And so we had all these different circles that were forming around passions. And that's how we actually built community within our service that we were offering. So that was 2 examples. So I think what I have to leave you with, though, is what I found in church as well, is that there's a bit of a warning. I think many rituals that we have within our organization and what we have today, some of them have been really well designed. Some of them have been designed because that's what everyone else is doing. And some of them have just been designed because they're legacy of a previous day or when you got started. And I think what we need to be careful of is that sometimes these rituals can both include and get people really, really intensely connected and really, really belonging together. But sometimes these rituals, if they're not done properly, can also push people away. So one good example that I have is if you're doing Friday night drinks every single week and there's really important stuff that's going on there, how do the people that can't drink or have to go home and look after their kids feel about always missing out on this one ritual? So can you change this ritual to be more flexible and be more inclusive, which I think is a really important topic. So that's my one warning. But on a really bright note, I really think that ritual design, and I'm just getting started, and I'd love to talk to you about it more. Trust me, this is why I invited Ted as well, so he's the expert. But I'd love to hear more and more of what you guys think about ritual design, how you might include it into your work, and also how you might embrace it or observe it in a different way. And I think awareness is a huge point here. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more, I have a couple of links that I'd like to share. But for now, if you'd like to ask some questions or 1 or 2 questions quickly, whilst I share some links for you guys, then you can please ask some questions. Thank you so much for listening to my talk as well. And thank you everyone for joining. We're at 57 people. It's so fantastic. We are always just absolutely blown away by the amount of people that join these events. And it's fantastic to see such a great community.
Yay!
Yay! Now my team can turn their cameras back on, so I'm not all alone here.
Yay!
Yay! Thanks, guys. All right, so now we'll just wait. How do you transfer an app-based company into a physical routine or ritual? Thank you, Roberto, for the question. There you go. Everyone can see the delay now because that question just came up for me. But I would say I think there are a bunch of really, really good app-based ritual apps, meditation apps, for instance, and going through and reflecting or being thankful, writing down every day what you're thankful. I think you probably wouldn't have to turn it into necessarily a physical ritual. I'd
love to know what that physical ritual means, and whether that question means like rituals internally inside the organization, or getting the users of that app to do physical kind of ritual-based things.
Yeah, I think there's simple in terms of the first one, in terms of remote work and actually getting a team to come together over an app. We just include what are you thankful for in the daily stand-ups that we have every morning. Super simple thing, super easy to do, really quick, but it also shows that value coming through.
I have a little example. Roberto just kind of confirmed it's like for the users to feel like they have they're participating in the rituals. I have one example from a game that I just started playing, Animal Crossing. It's become really popular right now, where a normal game is like, whenever I feel like playing the game, I can turn it on, play it for as long as I like, and then when I'm done, I turn it off and then come back whenever I like. And in this game, Animal Crossing, they've actually created the whole structure of the game to be based on real time. So the game is real time. When you come onto the game at 5 p.m. in the afternoon, it's 5 p.m. in the afternoon in the game, and there's certain things that are happening, or the sun is starting to go down, or there's certain animals out because they come out at dusk and things like that. And there's also certain things that happen on certain days. On Sunday, something happens, and this character in the game is like selling you a particular product, and you have to come into the game on Sunday in real life to get that thing or do that thing. So my kind of interpretation of why the game is doing that is to exactly create these rituals, so that, because we know, like from exactly what Adam said, when you embed these rituals in your daily life, they kind of cause you to continue these behaviors and create some meaning behind those behaviors. So I think in the game, it's about trying to get people to come back every day, because, oh, you have to wait till tomorrow for that next thing to happen. So it's kind of creating that ritual of coming back into the game every day, which could be seen as a good or a bad thing. But yeah, that's maybe my one answer to that question of how do you make an app put physical kind of rituals into something that's a digital app.
Yeah. All right, let's leave it there. I think that was also a great question about Molly, from Molly. Have you ever started or abandoned or changed them a lot? Rituals. Yeah, rituals should definitely be changed. I think that's the important part of them. Like if they're not connecting people to that higher value or the deeper value that you want to show, then definitely please like change them. And I think that's the beauty of when you look at church or religion or anything like that, the rituals have in essence changed from the steps. I think if you think of communion in a Catholic church to what I experienced, or different churches, the idea of communion is to come together and share the body of Christ, or to share this connected and eating together and community and to be around that board. But people do it so many different ways, and I think that's that's totally okay. That's totally fine, and I think it's about that higher message. All right.
I can just
enough of me talking. Done.
Then I'll talk then, shall I?
I'm gonna do the introduction now for Ted. I'm really excited. I did a shout out on LinkedIn like a few weeks ago, actually, because I'm really excited about this topic, and everyone said you've got to get Ted. Gotta get Ted. So I'm really excited that we finally got Ted. And he's donated his time and he's given his time. He's literally the expert. He's writing his PhD. He's been taking 10 years for his PhD. So he is the expert, and I'm very, very honored and privileged to have him here. I'm going to stop talking now. Over to you, Ted. I'm going to stop.
Thank you. I get to, in my defense, I did take some time off my PhD to practice working with rituals with professional football and with tourism, and also with a few other sort of financial services, telecom. So I have a good excuse. That's all I can say. I say hello from my mother-in-law and father-in-law's house here on the outskirts of Oslo, with these beautiful Christmas plates that they are on display. Those are very nice. But it's the only place I can actually come and get any peace. I have 2 children and a dog, and they're all equally as noisy. So I actually have a modicum of peace from here. What I shall try and do is I'll try and turn on my presentation, I think, which means I need to turn off my camera, I believe. Or if I don't, then you'll probably not get a full screen. So if we try this and this. And then we go here, and then we do that. Does that work, everybody? Can I have is that working? I need to hear from someone. Adam?
Yes. Looks good to me.
Good. Right. Okay. Then I shall begin. I hope there's not a delay too much on there. So yeah, I'll try and give some background. The head of service design at Oslo School of Architecture Design. We've been doing service design since 2004. I started there about 10 years ago, and we focus on public sector innovation in services, but we're also working with highly experiential services, which in a way my PhD contributes, my research contributes to that area. So as I said, the work that I've done is contribute to a lot of work, but I will talk quite a lot about football. I'm sorry, but it seems to be one of those areas that it was really quite a fruitful area to work with in this particular area. So I came into an interest in rituals and actually sacred consumer experiences. It's similar actually to Adam, that I grew up Catholic, and I was always fascinated by this world and sort of rich cultural space with all these myths and symbols and rituals. And if you check out Russell Belk's work from the 80s and 90s, one of the things they noticed is that people are having these sacred consumer experiences through the things that they buy, including services, products, connection to brands. Obviously, one of the best examples is Apple and the sort of sacralization of Steve Jobs. And there's a lot of really, really interesting articles about this whole area. And these are often actually instigated by customers themselves. And through the way that people consume, what Belk points to is that people are having what the sociologist Durkheim described as collective effervescence. So that's kind of when people come together and have these extraordinary, heightened, emotional, meaningful experiences, basically. And these are happening through what they consume and how they consume. And here you see the opening of an Italian Apple store, and this man clearly absolutely ecstatic about the fact he's been able to buy an iPhone and this amazing experience that people have. And so what I was kind of got really interested in was how do you actually design for these experiences? So rather than just thinking, okay, these are happening, but how could you actively do that to add value for customers, to build value through experience? So this got me really interested in the potential of ritual. But when I started looking at ritual, one of the things I realized is that rituals, the meaning of rituals and the power of rituals are also built around a lot of other elements. And Adam mentioned this earlier, that kind of really at the core of these extraordinary service experiences, or what I actually call sacred service experiences, therein lies things related to community and their values. And these community and values are often expressed through the symbols that people use, love, connect to, represent themselves through. And they're also through the stories that they tell about themselves, through their myths. Now, from a sort of anthropological view, myths aren't necessarily lies that we often think of them as being, but actually metaphors of some deeper truth that relates to a community. It tells you a story about who the community think that they are. And these are then often performed using the symbols through the rituals. And through all these elements, this interplay between these aspects, then a community expresses its values and strengthens its sense of community, strengthens its values, and also generate these extraordinary experiences. So if you look at Durkheim's work or Collins' work, who talks about interaction ritual chains, what they talk about is like a kind of vibrating between people that generates really powerful experiences. So without all these aspects, I think rituals can sometimes just be a little bit mechanical. So you have to really dig deep into what's all this kind of cultural material and all this meaningful material that lies in and around the ritual. But let me talk a little bit about ritual, because I think that's possibly what's of most interest here. And in a way, what's interesting is because it gives meaning to time in many ways. And we are designing with time. Time is a material for service design. And there's this beautiful match between ritual, adding meaning to time, and how you then transpose that into sort of your customer journey, into the service journey, into designing with time. So rituals are very much like passageways. They're transitions. They move you from one space to another. That could be physical space, but it could also be emotional space. So often through rituals, you change emotionally, internally, but also they can also be changes in sort of social space. So getting married or whatever it is, you go from one social sort of status to another. Rituals are also incredible ways of alleviating, dealing with anxiety, for example. So a really good example here, like a micro ritual here, is like a handshake. So excuse me. So like a handshake, really simple. You don't know someone, you stick out your hand, you shake hands, and then you kind of put your hand back, and you've gone through a form of transition. I've gone from not knowing you to now knowing you, and it also alleviates a tremendous amount of anxiety about how do I deal with this new person. And if you look at Goffman's work, he talks about interaction rituals. He talks about our days are full of these tiny, minute rituals that we don't even know ourselves, even in our language patterns, even the way we interact with each other. We fill them with these kind of performances that allow us to interact with each other, alleviate anxieties, and what he talks about, saving face, about saving, not feeling embarrassed, basically, as part of that. That's a very reductive view of it, but basically what the essence of that is. But also, if we look over here, that it could be about grand rituals. Van Gennep writes about this all the way back in 1909, and he talks about these rites of passage, these large social events where we transform, we transition, we move from one space to another. And here we see a marriage, and these obviously we can see those as rituals. And these big rituals are populated by small ones. But let me move on to the structure of ritual. And this is from Van Gennep. But strangely enough, there's very little research since 1909 that would argue very much against this structure for ritual. I'm going to just have a quick drink of water, so bear with me. So here we have the structure of ritual. Maybe some of you can see a bit of a customer journey going to appear in the next one, but basically what we do, there's a phase of separation in the ritual where we leave something behind. So the handshake is we put our hand out, we leave behind the not knowing someone. There's a transition space, which is the handshake, where we're kind of betwixt and between the liminal space, as Turner would call it, and then this reincorporation where we take our hand away, and now we're in this new phase of our lives of knowing someone. Clearly, in a marriage ritual, it could be separation, it could be engagement, it could be stag nights, hen parties, all kinds of stuff in that separation phase that takes you from being single to married. The transition, liminal space could be the wedding day, where you go through a series of rituals to go through that change. Then you reincorporate, you come back emotionally and socially change. And what Collins talks about in his book Interaction Ritual Chains from 2004 is that there are actually chains of smaller rituals that move through these spaces, and these transfer energy from one smaller interaction to the next. And so in a wedding rituals we talked about, you might go from the hen party to the the engagement party to whatever, as small rituals, and then you enter into this transition space, which is the wedding day, which is the rituals of wearing special clothes, the changing of names, exchanging rings, breaking cups. I don't know what your rituals are, but there's so many of those emotional chains that move you through it to a reincorporation phase. And often what happens in this transition phase is basically this collective effervescence, heightened experiences, and this is where people are really quite moved and have these really amazing heightened experiences. And often, as you see in rituals, this stimulation of the senses, we're digging deep into meaning, all these other things. And as I said to you, you probably can see some kind of formation here of a customer journey. But basically, what makes all this happen is the material, the cultural material, the cultural background. So, your culture will define what kind of experience you have. Your culture will define how you read the ritual that you are presented with. So, of course, a handshake, maybe within Inuit societies, or even, I teach quite a lot in Thailand, the handshake is obviously a very Western way of greeting people. Obviously, the stories that we tell and the symbols that we can actually understand and read, they contextualize that whole ritual. So to be able to design rituals, then we need to be able to draw on all this material, not have to understand it, make meaning out of it, and bring that into the ritual space itself. So this is a simplified version of my process. I thought I wouldn't scare you with the one that is currently languishing in my PhD. But basically what we're doing first, we're doing a pretty traditional service design mapping process where we're trying to understand the customer experience, the lived experience, but we're also looking for transitional spaces through the customer journey. So trying to locate those points where you might be moving. So in the football context, it might be entering the stadium, finding the seat, halftime, whatever. There are these transitional phases, entering the retail space. And then you're doing this kind of broader cultural scoping, which is digging much deeper into the broader social cultural context of the user groups that you're working with. So rather than looking and focusing just purely at the user need at point of interaction with the service, you're looking at this kind of broader cultural space. You're trying to understand what all that means. And then from that, we're making what we call the service myth. So this is the metaphorical story, the essence of what all that cultural scoping and mapping actually means. And then we're performing the service myth then through the ritual service journey, which is basically this sort of space that's ritualized, full of these meaningful service encounters. That's what MSE stands for. We've done this on quite a few. One of them was with banking. So this was for onboarding with a sort of privileged credit card. And so how we saw that actually as a ritual, as a rite of passage from, having made it within a banking space. I won't talk too much about this. It would take too long. We've also used it as a national strategy in Norway for the design of tourist experiences. So what we tried to do, we tried to sort of like really dig deep into sort of what's meaningful within Norwegian culture, and then give tourists access to that through ritualized tourist experiences. And so again, building up the emotional entrainment towards this climactic point and then bringing people out the other end. But the example I will use is the football example, because I think it's the most tangible. And this is a project called Alt for Norge, which means everything for Norway is the name of a Norwegian football song. Again, going through this phase, we look at transition mapping. We did some pretty classic customer journey mapping. This one's a bit chaotic, but basically, we tried to understand the user experience of going to a football game. We used different kinds of probes, interviews. We shadowed people, all the classic stuff, Service Safari, to create a number of interesting insights into the user experience on a functional level as much as anything, because we also fixed some of those things like ticketing, queuing, whatever. But we also looked at the player's journey. What's the player's experience like? And so we found also then these transitional spaces that were really sort of interesting, sort of potential ritualized areas. And then we started going into the cultural scoping and mapping part. And here we obviously were looking at the user interaction, point of contact with the service, but then we started trying to understand what are these broader sense of self, sense of identity that we could draw out through a mapping of this kind of cultural material. And some of it was, football related, and sort of classic football stories about who the Norwegian team is, who the Norwegian supporters are, but also to draw on some of the mythologies of Norwegianness. So digging into sort of Amundsen and his plight to beat the English to the North Pole, the heroes of Telemark who fought off the Nazis in Norway. The search for oil. Little old Norway manages to make it big by their bold move of moving out into sea and drilling. So we made some meaning of that, trying to understand what is this sense of self, this sense of identity of Norwegianness. And then we create the service myth. And what we drew out of that is this idea, this mythology of the underdog, the sort of the quest of the underdog, which really related well to a football team that never really wins that much, and also to sort of, supporters who keep going, and also to this sense of Norwegianness. And then we would play that out through the design of a ritual service journey. So in this case, we bring together the classic customer journey and then this structure here of the ritual structure, and we create this sort of really grand 5-act service journey. And this is quite a practical service journey we use to fill out these spaces. And here we have like Act 1, which is classic before and then after in Act 5. But then the sort of football day, the day of football, is divided into separation and then transition, the game, and then reincorporation, which is like, you know, leaving the stadium and what you do afterwards. And then we populate that then with all these meaningful service encounters that we can use then as chains through. I think we had about 14. Some of them are for players across the top here, as you can see, and some of them are for fans across the bottom. And, you know, different scenarios, different settings, different places. So let me give you a bit of an example of what we did. And again, we tried to play out as much as we could some of the underdog story as well. And some of the sort of, we also integrated some of the brand's values and brand story into there as well. So good example, about 4 weeks before the game, what used to happen was the Norwegian Football Association would contact players. You can have another drink of water. Excuse me a moment, please. So, you know, the Norwegian Football Association would contact players. They would basically send them an email. And it would be like, "Dear Martin Ødegaard, could you please consider playing for your national team in 4 weeks' time? We've contacted your agent. Please get in touch, blah, 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 blah." Now, if you reposition, reframe a football game as a grand rite of passage, as a ritual, then this is really not worthy a way to get in touch with someone. So what we then did is we reimagined the call up for you're playing for your country as this gifting ritual. Adam talked earlier about the happy birthday gift, but we used, you know, the gifting ritual as a way to heighten the meaning of the experience. I would love to actually talk about this cartoon. We developed a technique. I won't talk about it too much, but I'll quickly mention it. We developed a technique which we called graphic experiential evidencing, and I had this really great cartoonist working with me called Siva Lorentzen, who we were able to express the experience in much more sort of vivid terms than the customer journey or just storyboarding. But that's another story. I can give you the link to the article if you wish. Anyway, so what we sent to the players was a call-up letter, the shirt, Jarvi Elski, which means yes, I love my country on the inside of the shirt, boxing, messaging, and it worked really, really well. So this is the first mock-up we did. This was for the women's team, and there was some contextual information, a beautiful book, the shirt and the box and the call-up, and this gifting ritual was taken on then. On this side, you see later, I'd love to show you the film, but we don't have time, but of how they used it also for new recruits for the junior school. Moldova have taken this up as a way to heighten the experience of being called up to play for your country. And I see there's a couple of other countries within the sort of football family in Europe who are now using this way to heighten the meaning, the experience of being called up to your country. And then people are using this to Instagram and tell the story. So let me give you another couple of examples before we finish this talk, because I'm going to talk for too long. I'm very sorry. So if you think about 3 weeks before the game, we tried to look at the advertising for the game, which often was really about, come and see this game. The storytelling was most about sport, not about what it means. And we replaced that with the whole sort of underdog story. This is, can you hear that? I hope. I'll stop the music. But basically what we did, we reframed this within the sort of underdog story. This is when we lost against Germany. But we created, all the advertising went out, told this story of the underdog as we were also telling it within the stadium before, during, and after the actual experience, and tried to translate that into experience. So I'll give you one last example. And I think it's a really interesting example of how, having this ritualized dramaturgy affected the way that we designed, say, certain touch points. So this touch point that we were redesigning was this bus down here. This is we got a new bus, and so the team were going to have a new foil put upon it. And our in-house designer created a design for the bus, which was all on brand and very pretty, etc., etc. Which is some limitations because it had to be white, because that was the color of the bus sponsor. But basically, just before this went off to print, somebody said, well, wait, hold on a minute. Let's ask the question, what does the bus mean? And what does it do as an important touch point in this ritual that we have now designed? So we had this discussion about, what does the bus mean? I'm going to tell you at this point, there's a very famous football player in the room, and he just says, guys, it just takes the players to the fucking game. But actually, the bus is so much more, potentially so much more. We actually looked at where does the actual, where is the bus important? Where does it play out? What is it going to do? What role has it got within this ritual? We understood that it was, it's going to be, in the separation phase, but also in the reincorporation phase. And we looked at the places where it was going to drive and the spaces that it was going to habit. And so we had to then redesign the whole experience of arriving at the stadium for the players. And also, this was the first time that the fans would also meet the players for the game. So we had to consider all these aspects within that. So we designed this stuff that was related to the brand, but also related to the mountains and to Norwegianness, that would cover the train line and also cover the last part of the approach. We also decided, well, how does the bus talk with the design of the police car that would escort it? What would the speed of the bus be moving along to the space? So we moved from this highly branded, and it was all on brand, to something that was much more noble. And we tried to understand the bus, say, like if the king were to arrive at a state opening, he wouldn't arrive in a limousine with a picture of himself on there. It was really about getting this sense of the noble, the sort of ritualistic in this space. And what we did also on the door, we actually wrote the games that this bus had actually been to. So we also were able to privilege the bus as part of this whole experience. So this is the bus arriving at the stadium. This is it parked up, and then then the players get off. So then suddenly we had to decide, well, how are the players acting getting off the bus? So we insisted that the players wore suits and ties rather than tracksuits, and how they spent time with the fans as they came off the bus, and then also how you design the interior as you go towards the dressing room, using sort of this culturally understood material relating to sort of the country. And In the Thousand Homes is part of the national anthem, but it has this folklore, kind of down-to-earth feel to that storytelling that happens in the service experience for the players here. So you can read a little bit about this in this book here. I wrote a chapter for it, which sort of is a nice, simple description of the process relating to the work that we did with banking. There's also quite a complex description in this journal article, which you can get your hands on. But I think just to sort of summarize, I think one of the points with all this is that we're bringing this kind of cultural practice to service design. So, of course, we do ethnographic work when we do service design, when we're trying to get insights. But what we really want to do is to create this broader social cultural perspective. You have to broaden your view to understand what really matters to people, more than just what's happening at point of contact. And so then you start digging into, sort of ways people see the world related to these different layers of their sense of self within their culture. And that could be related to just being a football fan, to being Norwegian, to being European, goodness knows. And that's where we bring the meaningful into service provision, rather than just trying to fix quality and function, those kind of things. And also, I think the other thing is about moving from user to users, because of course what we're doing here essentially is designing for groups of people. So that we took over to the banking project. So instead of just thinking, okay, this is an individual interaction with the sort of the client, we're also looking at how do we bring groups of people together, either digitally or in physical spaces. More difficult with coronavirus, but you're designing for groups rather than just designing for single people, for an individual. And the future, well, I'm coming to a close, so don't worry, I'll shut up soon. I mean, all of this has been in experiential, highly experiential services, for the most part, in the private sector. But we've also been sort of doing some preliminary work looking at what this means in the public sector. And we were working with some emphysema sufferers. We didn't do more than just really talk around how we would work with this, but how could we use mythologies and rituals relating to, say, to smoking and sort of the outlaw and the outsider to help people create their own rituals to help themselves to actually make better choices about their healthcare. And other things that we've also been looking at is servitization. I mean, I really believe that, one of the great futures that we really need to look towards as service design is servitization, partly to save the planet as much as anything. And if you look at, say, analysis from, say, a fantastic book by Moroni and San Giorgi from 2011. One of the things they talk about is about, kind of revolutions in functionality to make things work better so we can use services instead of products. And they're absolutely right. We need to kind of really work on that sort of getting the function stuff to work so people will choose services rather than buying stuff and filling the world with more crap. But I also think that we need to create fantastic and meaningful and amazing experiences for people. So actually they choose services instead of products just because it's so much more fun and so much more amazing. And so I think, there's certain areas that we're looking at and how we could actually move towards a different future, thinking about, ritualized experiences, heightened experience, meaningful experience in service provision. So that's really it for me. I can send you some links to my work. We're also collaborating with the Ritual Design Lab out at Stanford, also the Ritual Design guys down in Imperial College who are working with products. And we have this ongoing conversation about, what is the future of ritual design and how can we build this as a field. And we're really interested in everybody's input because, of course, this is really quite new what we're doing. And I think it's going to be a growth area, and I hope that you all would like to be part of the conversation. I think that's about it for me. I guess I talked for at least half an hour, which makes me a sinner. But I'm now going to take you back to the screen.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm sure they will applaud in just a few moments.
So, questions.
I think we had some questions we could probably get started with.
Yeah, there were actually lots, and I wrote them, copied them out separately so I could kind of maybe post them in one long list in the chat so we don't have to scroll through. Should I do that?
Let's do that.
Okay. Let's see.
So now we're going to take 5 minutes for questions, and then I'll explain what we're going to do next.
Oh, that didn't work. Let me just post one at a time here. I can easily do that as well. Start with this one.
Okay. Any recommendations on how to go about breaking, modifying legacy rituals? Also, do you see rituals linked to behavior change?
Okay, that was kind of two questions, wasn't it? I think legacy rituals. I mean, I think there's also you can also adapt rituals. And there's quite a lot of theory to show that people have adapted rituals. We adapt rituals all the time. I mean, if you look at it's interesting to go to a humanitarian förbund, I don't know what that is in English, humanitarian wedding, for example, how they've appropriated and used rituals from a Judeo-Christian sort of tradition, and then they are adapted and changed to fit in a sort of a non-theos sort of ritual space. So I think what we can do is if we have rituals that are not good, I think we can also adapt them and move them and change them. I think we can also change the meaning of rituals to a certain extent if we start to integrate new elements and aspects. And I think we could also refer to, say, the Catholic Church that changed its whole ritual structure in 1963, and for a lot of people the meaning changed there as well. It wasn't a very successful move. It moved too quickly. But I think what you can do is that you can take rituals and develop them and change them. I think a great example is of the Scottish kilt, which is a complete fabrication of a ritual that the Scots. So I understand there's a Scottish person here listening to this, but the kilt did exist as a part of Scottish culture, but it was appropriated and adapted for British Empire use. So the fine, beautiful piece of cloth that's been now sort of beautifully tailored and adapted, and the meanings behind it are actually imperial constructions. And you will often find a lot of rituals that we find have this element of a ritual that existed before that they get appropriated, moved, changed, slightly adapted. And I think one of the great ways of inventing rituals for your purpose is to look to outside maybe of your immediate cultural space, but within a cultural space that you understand, and bring some of those things and adapt them for you. because then you don't feel that it's an uncanny valley situation or a strange situation. I think sometimes people say, "Oh, let's do a ritual where we do a funny slapping thing," and it then just feels silly. But of course, that if it relates to something that's understandable, I mean, if you understand, like, sorry, I'm really going on now. I'll stop me if you want me to. But if you look at a handshake could be a greeting, but of course, a handshake during a graduation ceremony is something else. It's the same action, but the meaning changes, and you put into that somehow the meaning that you want it to be. But some of these things might take a bit of time to do it, and you might have to do it a little bit ninja-like to stealthily sort of change these things to mean something else, build on it, and then eventually maybe change from there.
I think to add to that, Louis Dupont, what's his name? Dupont, the guy that did School of Life. I shared the link about Atheism 2.0, and I think drawing upon that, he really does some great examples. If you're traveling, think of a pilgrimage. If you're doing this, think of that. And I think that's a great way of adapting what users are already familiar with. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Really good point. All right. Are there any good resources and standard methods for ritual design like the ones you showed in your talk?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I would say like Medium, just go on Medium and type ritual design. There are really great examples there. That's how I got started. But Ted?
I really recommend read one of the chapters in the book, or you will find some kind of guidance. It's an endless process of design and redesign that we work with in terms of actually creating a toolkit. But in a way, a lot of what we do is more about the approach than necessarily having a toolkit. I've worked with my master's students more recently to try and get my repertoire into a more sort of usable form. And we have created some tools, and we'll be setting up a new website quite soon, and I'll share those tools with people. The other great resource is the Ritual Design Lab. Kurshat and Margaret, who run that, they have a great book about designing rituals for organizations, and they have some really brilliant, simple steps to move towards designing rituals. We've worked quite a few workshops together, both at Stanford and also at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design, where we've used like mixture of my method and his method, and he's got some really nice, tangible stuff to work with. And the book, Design for Organization, which I can also share the link, or if Adam hasn't done already, has got some really great step-by-step stuff. The other guy, Weston Baxter, down in the Imperial College, he has also, they are releasing a ritual design toolkit soon. So I'm really excited about seeing that. I think it's going to be fantastic. Their work's really interesting. That's very much a lot about behavioral science view of ritual. My view is more from a social cultural perspective, but they've drawn a lot on behavioral science. So they're going to release a toolkit quite soon as well. We'll also be setting up our sort of collective website, which is the several organizations, where we'll also share quite a lot of our tools that we've developed, either alone or together or whatever. That was a long answer. Sorry, guys.
The next question actually got moved up because of other comments, and it was actually Alexander asked, a link to the article would be lovely. And now I'm not sure which article that was. Did you mention an article?
Yeah, sure. My article, I can send you a link to all the articles by all means. If I put them together at the end of this session, I can send it to Adam or Dee.
Yeah.
And you can have a list of books, articles, whatever you like on the whole area.
And I'm keeping track of all the links that have been posted. So we always send a follow-up email to everyone who joined with all of these links. So that. And the next question. I'll just read it out if you like. From Kayati, are there common rituals you tend to apply at a global level across your service design projects, or are they specific to the actual particular project that you're doing at that time?
Well, this again is interesting because I think there's so many views of culture, of course. So if you're talking from a cultural perspective and you then talk about normative models, you get groups of people who talk about that there are structures to all things. So structures to myth. So you have Levi-Strauss stuff. There's common structures to stories. You have Joseph Campbell says there's only one story to tell across the monomyth, blah blah blah. And you have a view obviously then from say anthropologist from interpretive anthropology who thinks, every context is completely different, completely changes, and the context is always different, blah, blah, blah. You can only understand it from the context it's in. And I think they're both right. So I think what you can draw from this, my view at least, is that there are structures that exist and they're recognizable across all cultures. And that, for example, is the tripartite structure of the ritual. I think there's only a few dissenting voices here, and this is 100 years of sociology and anthropology to kind of back this up, that these three-part structure must be something completely human. And I think also you see in animals, they also do these rituals. And as to whether they're tripartite in their structure, but we see them happening. But the point is, if you use the tripartite structure, it does allow you to create meaning for parts of the ritual you're designing. So if you know that part of it is about leaving something behind, then you're adding aspects that allow you to do something determined to say, I'm leaving something. So we work with tourism. We had aspects of the tourist offering that was all about changing, eating the last suppers, leaving behind something. I'm going off, sorry, on a tangent. If we go back to this interpretive anthropological viewpoint, then you still have to really draw from, if you remember